Welcome to the Stone Cold Truth. I'm Roger Stone, joined by my colleague Tyler Nixon. And here we are in the first 100 days of the Trump administration, while the mainstream media rushes to declare the Trump administration an unmitigated disaster. I see something quite different. How about you, Tyler?
Activity, and because they're so dead set against Donald Trump, they don't understand the larger, I think, paradigm that's been smashed by Trump, which is the political correctness, the control of the mainstream media, of the message. Trump has really galvanized, I think, the alternative media, the alternative narrative, I guess you could say, and has really, in many ways, they discredit themselves as they continue to go along bashing Trump and constantly not just being skeptical or critical, but being absolutely oppositional and adverse to everything he does, everything he says. And, you know, the Russia, look who's talking about the Russia connection now. The last I heard of it, frankly, was E.J. Dionne and David Brooks on NPR, and that was the extent of it. You don't hear Schiff anymore. You don't hear any of this because it's it was a big nothing burger, as you called it in the first place. But the first 100 days, I think Trump has really jumped in there, unlike any president that I've seen, which proves really that it proves the lie that went along, that he has no experience in government. The man ran a multi-billion-dollar company. He has all sorts of operations all over the world. To think that he couldn't jump into that White House, and with the amount of power and the people who hop and pop at whatever the president says, is absurd. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. He's a doer, and he's going to continue to do. And I think we've made huge progress in just 100 days on many issues.
Well, look, in the first 100 days, President Trump's taken dramatic steps to undo burdensome regulations, restore law and order, bolster the military, revive the American dream, change Washington by holding it accountable, put the American worker first. They confirmed Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch, who I think is an outstanding pick and will be a great jurist. And I think the people who put Trump in office can see and feel the promises he's delivering on. Interestingly, a new ABC News Washington Post poll shows 96% of those who supported the president in November say they'd do it again. Interestingly enough, the number of those who said they'd stick with Hillary Clinton was substantially lower. The White House put out an incredible statement by the numbers, which I thought was worth noting. The president has enacted more legislation and signed more executive orders in the first 100 days than any president in a half century. He enacted 28 pieces of legislation, more than any other president since Harry Truman. He has signed 25 executive orders, the most of any 100 days in over 50 years, which will, by the way, be 30, I believe, tomorrow. Achieved the first Supreme Court confirmation in 100 days since 1881. He's instituted tough immigration policies that have driven illegal border crossings to a 17-year low. This is important, Tyler, because instead of catch and release, now we catch, detain, and deport, which is what the law has always required. And therefore, illegal boarding crossings are down between 70 and 50% across the board. He's also removed more job-killing regulations through legislation than any president in U.S. history. Estimated savings by Donald Trump so far, based on his executive actions, about $18 billion a year annually. Not only has economic optimism been renewed, with consumer confidence reaching its highest level in 16 years, but the real hard economic data, the actual joblessness figures and job creation figures are showing real progress, with joblessness down, but more importantly, job creation up by 235,000 new jobs in February alone. The president's also ordered the toughest new rules to stop revolving door between Washington lobbyists and government officials. We're going to see more, even tougher ethics legislation from the Trump administration. So the mainstream media, you can see why they're falling over themselves to say he's accomplished nothing. It's interesting that the AP reported on March 3rd that according to the U.S. Department of Labor, unemployment claims dropped by 19,000 to 242,000 the previous week, to the lowest level in 44 years since 1973 when my man Dick Nixon was president, your relative, Tyler.
That's right.
The Labor Department further reports that 2.7 million Americans are collecting unemployment insurance, which is down almost 7% from the same time a year ago. The Labor Department also considers the U.S. job market to be solid, with employers adding 227,000 jobs in January and 235,000 jobs in February, pushing the unemployment rate to 4.8%, close to what economists now consider full employment.
Yeah, I think the fact of Donald Trump as president in itself is overlooked by the media, who are looking for a checklist. They have their own criterion. The fact that that he is the type of leader he is huge in the calculus, particularly in foreign policy. When has China been so forthcoming? Let's just say. When have I guarantee you that Kim Jong-un is seriously and righteously afraid at this point and feels threatened, and as he should. The fact of the economic optimism that's out there. I think, the problem with leftists and Democrats is that they think that, they have their grand schemes to fix the world, but they don't think that there's any consequences for all the legislation and the regulation and the meddling and interventions that they get involved with. But there are. And with a Donald Trump, for example, I think you have just the fact that he is in office, that they know. He spoke to the NRA the other night, and I felt that the two biggest issues for me personally were the Supreme Court and the Second Amendment. And in those cases, I think a lot of people can rest easier. We're not having to constantly battle the creeping Leviathan leftist government. You have someone in office who wants to get the government off people's backs, who is for the working man, who wants to cut taxes, who will protect the Second Amendment, and who is appointing justices to the Supreme Court, will appoint justices, probably may well appoint more than any other, say, for Franklin Roosevelt, or at least in the modern media era, than we've seen in the past. As appointing justices who will protect the Constitution, who are abide by the rule of law, and aren't just legislating from the bench. And these are huge. This is huge. This is why the left is so demoralized, and righteously so. They should be demoralized because they're done.
Well, and let's break a little news here on the Stone Cold Truth. It is an open secret in Washington, and my very best sources tell me that Justice Anthony Kennedy will announce his retirement imminently. So Donald Trump is about to get his second Supreme Court nominee. I am hopeful now that he will go beyond the list of conservative jurists that he put forward in the campaign and felt constrained to choose from, to pick a Supreme Court justice like, I don't know, Judge Andrew Napolitano. Somebody who is a libertarian, someone who understands the need to forward a Trumpian agenda as opposed to a right-wing agenda, someone who, like Franklin Roosevelt's Supreme Court nominees, will support the president, not support any particular ideology.
Yeah, that would be excellent. And even better news is Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, appears to be backing off somewhat from his stance with regard to the legalization of cannabis across the country in many states. So
we'll be back in just a moment to sum this up on the Stone Cold Truth with Roger Stone and Tyler Nixon. Stand by.
Is the Reverend Jesse Jackson, and you are tuned in Roger Stone on the Stone Cold Truth.
Welcome back. I'm Roger Stone. You're here on the Genesis Communications Network with my colleague Tyler Nixon. Big night in Delaware last night, Tyler. I spoke to the Delaware Republican State Committee fundraiser. Met a lot of your old cronies from your days as a political activist in Delaware. A tremendous crowd. the Delaware Republican Party turning the corner, 1 seat away of taking control of the state Senate, turning what has become a totally blue state red again. I met a lot of great folks, a lot of great activists. We had a great time. A lot of talk last night about what's going on at Fox News. As I think everybody knows, Bill O'Reilly has been fired. I have mixed emotions about that. Bill O'Reilly's book on the Kennedy assassination was an abomination. On the other hand, I don't really blame Bill. He not only didn't write the book, he's never read the book.
Yeah. I let me just say I have no tears shed. In fact, I danced a little jig when I heard that O'Reilly was gone. I think he's been a bombast for all the wrong sides of every so-called conservative position, from war to drugs to the drug war. And of course the Kennedy assassination, which is terrible because he was actually he did some groundbreaking work with regard to George Mohrenschildt back in the day and was definitely on the trail of the assassins, so to speak. But for some reason, when he went mainstream, he turned it around and became an apologist for the Warren Commission. So good riddance.
Very
to
much,
Bill.
by the way, very much like Geraldo Rivera, who also did some groundbreaking work. The first person to interview Lyndon Johnson's mistress, Madeleine Brown. When I asked him about that in the green room, he said, and I quote, "Madeleine who?"
Yeah,
He's
exactly.
completely forgotten his early reporting, and he now believes the Warren Commission reached the correct conclusion. Perhaps they require this of you when you go to work at Fox, but frankly, what's more interesting is the increasingly embattled position of Sean Hannity at Fox. Hannity seems to have staked his long-term survival on the survival of Bill Shine, who rose to essentially head the network after my friend Roger Ailes, a genius in my opinion, the man who built Fox into the powerhouse it is today, was deposed through a series of false allegations of sexual harassment. And now essentially challenging the Murdochs, challenging management. Hannity is saying that if Shine goes, he goes. If Shine is removed, he essentially threatens the Fox News channel as we know it is over. Now, Sean Hannity is not a beloved figure within Fox. The other conservatives who work there, folks like Napolitano and Judge Jeanine and others, have, I would say, a mixed view of Sean. He's pretty sharp elbows. But there's a lot of talk about a new conservative television network. Certainly the capital and the talent could be found. So Fox goes the way of CNN. If Fox becomes a pale imitation of the Sky News Channel in Britain, I think they are going to do two things. They're going to push a much larger audience to Infowars.com, which has, despite the best efforts of Facebook and Google and Amazon to kneecap them, is still growing by leaps and bounds, and perhaps creating a vacuum for a new conservative network, one that has an automatic audience as people jump off of Fox.
Well, absolutely. That's really what we need at this point. I've often felt, and I'm sure others have, that Fox it's great that it exists in terms of getting the alternative voices that have been on for, the past 20 years in conservatives, but at the same time has become a conduit, a sort of a bottleneck through which that's the source to go to. It's the only source, really. An alternative network would be excellent, and certainly I think you'd see a bleeding away if it were to be viable of talent from Fox News, as well as from there's a vast pool of talent out there, I think, of conservative talkers, of libertarian talkers, of people who have, far, far greater understanding and, in my view, incisive intellect and ability than, say, a Sean Hannity or any of the general talking heads that you get on Fox News. I think Roger Ailes did a great job. But if they try to water down Fox, they're going to just precipitate its end as we know it, frankly. Jumping off to a topic you sort of touched on, Roger, just now, Google and to a lesser extent Facebook, but really Google. Google is operating as effectively a monopoly. And it's come to the level of almost a public utility, because where else do you go to search? Where can you find information on anything out there? And there's talk of antitrust actions against Google, and I wouldn't shed a tear for a second. I mean, I'm obviously a libertarian. I do not shine to government action intervening in markets and so forth, but these guys are adhesive as far as the type of, I mean, they have embedded themselves in basically all activity that goes on, commercial and otherwise, in the world, and they are able to, from behind their curtain there, manipulate this data and information in any way they see fit without any sort of transparency or disclosure. And I think if they were talking about breaking up Microsoft or potential action against antitrust action against Microsoft, Google should absolutely be in a prime target at this point, particularly if they are engaging in censorship.
Well, the other big flap at Fox this past week involved Jesse Waters, a host there who I think does a terrific job. He was under fire because he criticized the reaction to a speech that Ivanka Trump gave in Berlin when she was talking on a panel about female entrepreneurship, the fact that she was being jeered and booed by women. And then when Waters said, I really liked the way she was speaking into that microphone, some on the left tried to say that that was somehow a sexual slur or a sexual innuendo, when in fact, I think what Waters is referring to was the fact that Ivanka never lost her cool. Her voice and how it was slow and steady and resonated, never really giving in to the jeering and the booing around her. This is so typical of the left, making something out of nothing. And I am hopeful that Waters will not come under any punishment internally at Fox, because I think his comments were both appropriate and completely innocent. People are seeing sexual innuendo where there is none.
Well, certainly the leftists always do. They're obsessed with it. I think they've Jesse Waters, of all the people that he might make a crack about in that way, Ivanka Trump would be the absolute last person on earth. He adores President Trump. I mean, let's face it, that's just reality. So, I mean, that's just muckraking and the typical. This is what they're down to, really. They have nothing but just nitpicking nonsense. Well,
I do think we are looking at a situation, Tyler, where Mr. Schein has been cited in at least 4 of the lawsuits, and if Schein goes, it will be a sign that Fox News is over as we know it. We'll be right back to the Stone Cold Truth.
This is Richard Milhouse Nixon, and the Cold War may be over, but the Stone Cold Truth is still around. And I give you my buddy, Roger Stone.
Rolls on. And thank you, Uncle Tricky, as we call him around the Nixon household. You are listening to The Stone Cold Truth with your host, Roger Stone, and I am his cohort, Tyler Nixon. Well, Roger, North Korea is heating up. There's a lot going on with Kim Jong-un, or as I like to call him, Kim Jong-loon, because he is a lunatic, frankly, cannot have nuclear weapons, and this could not, I think, for the security of the planet, have been a better time to have Donald J. Trump in the presidency, because I sincerely believe that he will not mess around when it comes to taking action to disarm this effectively a gulag posing as a country. It's a cult that is a gulag posing as a country. It's
as you know, Tyler, the thing I find most objectionable when I saw a photo of the 27-year-old North Korean dictator with his generals last week. Look carefully at the sleeve length of all of the uniforms of his generals. Why do their sleeves always come down to the first knuckle? I don't get this. Can these people not go to Hong Kong and get some decent tailoring? It's an abomination. It's just an abomination.
It really is. And you think of how that's been replicated so many times across that country. I think it has to do, Roger, with the fact that the North Korean people have been so starved and so abused that they're actually shrinking. for physically shrinking. I don't know.
That could be. No, to take a serious point that you were making, which I agree. If the surgical strike in Syria showed nothing else, it is that Donald Trump is not a president who will draw a line in the sand and then sit back helplessly while our adversaries charge across the line. It would be an egregious mistake for the North Korean dictator to challenge Donald Trump. Because this is not Barack Obama that he's dealing with, and Donald Trump is not made of sugar candy. He is as tough as nails, and he's going to protect the interests not only of the United States, but the world community against this lunatic. Now, I, like you, I'm an anti-interventionist, but there are times when American power must be projected and where the planet must be protected, and this conceivably is one of them. Even though there is no evidence that these guys can get a rocket beyond the South China Sea, the fact that they keep trying shows that they need to be kneecapped.
Absolutely. And I think you touched on exactly what my thought was. You mentioned Barack Obama, who was too weak and too vacillating and too, frankly, just really not any type of international leader other than to be an apologist for American centrism and power, which, why be the president of a country if you really just think of it as a bad actor in the world? But anyway, conversely, I think he is not, and I'm speaking of Donald J. Trump now, President Trump, is not like the Bush family who had all these ulterior motives and background sort of nefarious schemes going on as to why we, for example, invaded Iraq, a country that had nothing absolutely to do with 9/11 whatsoever. Yet, that was a war that we had to open up. Rumsfeld said at the day of 9/11, we might as well use this for wider interventions. I am definitely an anti-interventionist, definitely someone who believes in a limited American foreign policy, having served myself in the Middle East as well as in Germany in the Army Infantry back in the Gulf War era. I don't want to see any of my fellow soldiers that still are in the Special Forces and otherwise ever have to be put in harm's way frivolously, as I feel that the Bushes, or worse, for nefarious ulterior motives. I think Trump absolutely is someone who supports the troops in the truest sense, will not send American troops into harm's way unless it's absolutely necessary. And as a libertarian and anti-interventionist, I have to say North Korea has to be dealt with. This man is a lunatic. He cannot have nuclear weapons or the ability to launch them. And regardless of whether the estimates are that whether he can do it or not, whether they'll ever have the capability of doing it, just to unfortunately quote Dick Cheney, we only have about a slim percent margin of error to work with, and we can't take the risk. Would you be willing to take a 1% risk of having an American city incinerated? I would not. I think it's worth it to take this guy out while he's not quite reached that nuclear capability yet, and the heat's on. I think Trump is, building goodwill with China, and I think it's interesting what's going on with China. Richard Nixon opened that door back in 1972, a brilliant move, I think, in the geopolitical scheme of things, and I think Donald Trump is really, many ways, reviving that strategy that Nixon employed of triangulating with the Russians and the Chinese, sort of playing them off against each other. And similarly, Nixon also, at least with regard to Vietnam, told Henry Kissinger often, let's employ the crazy man theory of the presidency. In other words, let the Viet Cong think that I'll just go in and wipe them out with nukes if necessary, that maybe he's a little unhinged and crazy and who knows what he might do. I think Trump is perfectly sort of skated that line, that edge between he's firm, he knows what he's doing, he's in charge, but who knows what he'll do. He has said before, I'm not going to project what I'm going to do.
Actually called by Nixon the madman theory, where Kissinger would go to the North Koreans in Paris and say, look, I can't control this guy much longer. If you guys don't come to terms, he could just push the button and annihilate you. It really is. It is high level diplomatic courage and brilliant in a way. Now would probably be a very good time to tell you that my book, The Bush Crime Family, co-written with St. John Hunn, is now available at Barnes & Noble and at Amazon.com in paperback with an entire new chapter about George P. Bush, the Texas Railroad Commissioner, who would also aspire to be president. He's got some problems with sexual harassment and rape allegations in his past as well. But this book really sums up how the chief priority of the Bushes, both father and son, was lining their pockets and the pockets of their cronies, while their policies made Americans poorer and more jobless. That really kind of sums it up. So I am very proud of this book, which was originally published as Jeb and the Bush Crime Family. Jeb went from Jeb exclamation point to Jeb question mark to we took Jeb's name off the book entirely because he's completely irrelevant. The man couldn't draw flies in Florida.
Yeah.
Just recognize that Donald Trump defeated not only the sitting U.S. Senator from Florida, but the former governor of Florida in the Florida primary going away. Not close. That tells you how strong the tide was for a new direction. So if you want to hear the inside skinny on the Bushes, George W. Bush's involvement in the Kennedy assassination, George W. Bush's involvement in the trafficking of millions of dollars worth of cocaine through Mena, Arkansas, to illegally finance the Nicaraguan Contras, the inside story on the George W. Bush years. Grab The Bush Crime Family by Roger Stone and St. John Hunt, now available from Skyhorse Press.
Yeah, it's truly astonishing that the sort of veneer of the past with Old Man Bush, who was probably the worst spook of them all in the Bush family, including involvement potentially that I've seen enough in the Kennedy assassination back in '63 in Dallas. But we do have Travis Irvine coming up in the next segment. He is headed to the White House Correspondents' Dinner, which President Trump has brilliantly managed to preempt with his Harrisburg 100-day rally, and I think it's fitting that the 100th day of his presidency should fall on the same day as this Correspondents' Dinner to sort of bump these the hoity-toits in the press corps off their perch, off their special little thing where they love bashing Republicans and praising the likes of Barack Obama. And then in the second hour, we're going to have Stefan Molyneux joining us, actually, and that'll be very interesting. Roger, I think
we're coming up on a hard break here, so we will be back with Travis Irvine, Stefan Molyneux, and all of that. Stay tuned for the Stone Cold Truth.
This is Bernie Sanders, and you're listening to The Stone Cold Truth with Roger Stone.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. You're back at the Stone Cold Truth here on the Genesis Communications Network. I'm joined by my co-host, Tyler Nixon, and now phoning in is our traveling correspondent, Travis Irvine, who joins us often here at the Stone Cold Truth. Travis is a stand-up comedian, libertarian activist, a filmmaker, a man of many talents, and I understand you are covering the event tonight, the White House Correspondents' Dinner for Mediaite. You're going to be on the red carpet. The first thing I want to know, Travis, is what are you wearing? Are you going black tie tonight?
Oh, good Lord. I could never afford a black tie. I haven't worn a black tie since I attended all the bar mitzvahs in my hometown of Bexley, Ohio, Jewish suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio. I don't think I've worn a black tie since then. It's too hot to wear anything like that, so I am wearing the classic Travis Irvine of khakis, T-shirts, and very cool blazer.
Well, I'll try to help you with that in the future. This, to me, is become a non-event. I must tell you, when I lived in Washington, during my days in the Reagan administration, during my days in Reagan administration Washington, an invitation to the White House Correspondents' Dinner from a media organization was a coveted prize. And Donald Trump has recognized that this has become more and more a mainstream media opportunity to bash Republican presidents, and that the stand-up comedians who they pay extremely well to come in and be the master of ceremonies and the keynote speaker. They get more and more vituperative, more and more ideological, and candidly, less and less funny. And now it appears to me that President Donald Trump has gutted this event by announcing, by the way, as Richard Nixon did, he's not attending. In fact, he's going to have a rally of the American people in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania at the exact same time. That, to me, is nothing short of brilliant.
I mean, it's a brilliant move by President Trump to, you're absolutely right, usurp the entire thing by not attending. Not just a page from Nixon's playbook, but I believe Reagan didn't attend his first one. Of course, granted, there was an attempt on his life. Trump has always hated the media. He's always combated the media. They're the opposition party. So, why would you go to this thing? I mean, you're just setting yourself up for failure if you go there. I'm interested to see what he does with these in the future because it's like you said, Roger, Trump has this ability to turn things into non-events. These big hoity-toity Washington, D.C. establishment celebrations. So I don't know what the attitude is going to be there. I'm going to be on the red carpet for Mediaite. I'm going to be talking to all these folks. Again, if they talk to me, normally they don't want to talk to any other outlet beyond their own. So it's going to be a different kind of vibe tonight. So I'm interested to see what happens.
Well, Trump's a genius at taking the wind out of their sails. And you said that he hates the media, Travis. I don't think he hates the media as much as he knows he's realistic about how the media views him and is out, has the long knives out for him. And it reacts as any rational person would who has basically an effective mob after them at any given time. And I have to say, it is absolutely a stroke of genius, this rally in Pennsylvania. And I believe that there's a genius behind that, someone who's in the deep background of Donald Trump's, one of these longtime political advisors, probably the longest time political advisor. And I think I've heard of him. The name escapes me at the moment, but I know that someone has been whispering in his ear to just take the sails out of this, the wind out of the sails. And I will say I find it extremely ironic that if you recall, it was 2011 that Barack Obama used the opportunity at the White House Correspondents' Dinner to stand up and for minutes, it was almost painful, to lambast Donald Trump and to go after him and to humiliate him. And Trump was absolutely, you could see, not exactly thrilled about the situation, although he just sort of nodded and kind of kept a grim face. But I think that's probably where he, in his mind, said, I'm going to run for president and I'm going to beat this guy.
Tyler, I think you're exactly right. It was in that exact moment that I believe Donald Trump decided that he was going to even that score by running for president. And he grimaced and he grinned and bore the slings and arrows of the elitist snots around him. But I go to that great clip where they go to Barack Obama and they say, Donald Trump says that you are the worst president in American history. And Obama says, yeah, well, at least I got to be president.
Yeah, exactly. And drops the mic.
Who's laughing now, Barry? Who's laughing now?
That's right.
Well, the interesting thing is, of course, George H.W. Bush, the sniveling, obsequious, establishment-sucking president, never missed a single White House Correspondents' Dinner. He was there to sit there and smile while they dumped on him and pretended like it was all camaraderie and it was all kumbaya. What a loser. What an extraordinary loser.
Never hit back really hard. And it just goes to show you that, in the end, really, George H.W. Bush, although he took those slings and arrows and pretended to sort of be this kind of grandfatherly sort of namby-pamby milquetoast guy, behind the scenes knew exactly what was going on as a ruthless operator who runs effectively, as your excellent book, Roger, with St. John Hunt is called, The Bush Crime Family.
Yeah, it is. It's going to be interesting what happens. I don't even know how much coverage the White House Correspondents' Dinner is going to get. I suspect the president is widely figured out that he can suck up all the coverage. And I must tell you, the beauty of going to Pennsylvania, the place where Donald Trump broke Hillary Clinton's back, the place where in the end he guaranteed that she's likely to do prison time. because I still believe no person is above the law, and that Attorney General Sessions needs to convene a grand jury to begin an in-depth probe of the Clinton Foundation. Because as I said last night in my speech in Delaware, the Clinton Foundation is not a charity. It's a slush fund for grifters. It's a vehicle for the facilitation of multi-million-dollar bribes. And in a just society where the law matters and where elites cannot skirt the law just because of who they are, Bill and Hillary and their greedy, foul-mouthed, nasty little daughter, Chelsea, who, by the way, is legally liable because she's an officer of the nonprofit, and therefore she is the one who would be liable to prosecution for various crimes there. They really ought to be under public scrutiny. We don't have royal families in the United States. If Richard Nixon can be impeached and on the verge of prosecution, well, so can the Kennedys, so can the Obamas, and more importantly, why shouldn't Susan Rice and Valerie Jarrett, having abused their access to security information prepared, gleaned through surveillance by our intelligence agencies, why do they not go the way of Bob Haldeman and John Ehrlichman? When are their prison sentences going to begin? After all, no person is above the law.
Absolutely. And Chelsea Clinton's name is on the foundation, by the way, which is almost by definition a RICO, a racketeer influence corrupt organization, period. End of story. I mean, it's amazing that what they've gotten away with. But, Donald Trump's in office now. I think things are going to change, and they should be prosecuted. But if they're not, as long as they're not back in power, I'm okay with it. Travis, who would you really like to interview tonight? Who would you like to ambush if you could?
Anybody from CNN. They've been the hardest people to get. Anytime I encounter a talking head or an anchor from CNN, they tell me they're not allowed to talk to me. I don't even know what that means. Carol
they're not,
is the only...
As you know, they're not a real news organization. That is the epitome of fake news. Nothing at CNN, no one on there, nothing they say can be taken seriously because they're wrong so much of the time. They're just a bunch of elitists. But don't mistake that for news in any way. That's some kind of left-wing entertainment propaganda thing they've got going there.
Ted Turner's brainchild.
Elitist. Yeah, you definitely nailed it. The elitist angle. So I'd say Jake Tapper, Gloria Borger, Dana Bash, anybody within those realms.
Anderson Cooper,
my gosh, yeah. All these folks have turned me down at some point just for a simple interview, a few questions. So tonight, if they're on the red carpet, I'll be there, and they better talk to me this time.
Isn't that amazing that these media figures don't want to be interviewed? I mean, of all the hypocrisy you can imagine, it's just it's really astonishing.
Well, it really proves they're not journalists, really. That's really what it proves. Also explains why the CNN audience continues to dissipate, while despite the best efforts of Google and Amazon and Facebook to kneecap us, alternative conservative media continues to be vibrant and robust. We'll be back at the Stone Cold Truth with Tyler Nixon momentarily. Stand by. You're with us on the Genesis Communications Network. Welcome back. I'm Roger Stone, joined by Tyler Nixon here on the Stone Cold Truth, proudly on the Genesis Communications Network. We bring you the very best of politics and culture from the liberty point of view. And joining us in the next several segments is the outstanding libertarian-oriented commentator and avatar of all things freedom-oriented, Stefan Molyneux. Tyler, we got a lot to talk about coming up, but you wanted to make a point about the NSA and some big news from them today.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is coming right out of Reuters. It's practically breaking, is that in the headline, at least in the Reuters, as U.S. spy agency abandons controversial surveillance technique. Try illegal surveillance technique, which is where they've been basically without a warrant collecting all the digital communications of every American. And every American who even mentions a foreign intelligence target in their messages or in their conversations. So in my mind, I guess if you mention the name like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed or Osama bin Laden, technically you would be, I guess, open to, or whatever, whoever have you is in the news, you mention their name, you're subject to warrantless collection of your conversations, texts, emails by the NSA. Well, thankfully, and who's to say what they really do behind the scenes? I mean, I don't think they're believable in the first place. They claim they're going to delete information that's been collected illegally. It's like, oh, well, thank you so very much, National Security Agency. We're so glad you're going to clean up your trail of illegal conduct going back years, spying on every single American and their digital communications. I mean, it's insane, and it should have ended long ago. But, hats off to Edward Snowden, who exposed this, and made liars, frankly, of top intelligence officials who testified, perjurers at that, when they testified before Congress and denied the existence of such a program. And
you raise a good point. Why isn't this James Clapper? Why is he not in prison right now? He went under oath in front of the Congress, and he denied that this metadata collection program existed, and he was exposed. Instead, he's allowed to come back and correct it? No, he should have been indicted, he should have been tried, and he should be in the slammer today. This is how elite Washington works. This is how the deep state operates. They break the law with impunity. When they get caught, they apologize. They say it won't happen again, but they change nothing. You may have seen on InfoWars about a month ago a terrific piece by Dr. Jerry Corsi, which revealed that the government has been surveilling certain select Americans, including Donald J. Trump, as early as the Bush administration under a program called Operation Dragnet, in which a number of prominent Americans, including Sheriff Joe Arpaio in Arizona, Donald Trump in New York, were being surveilled on their home and business telephones, office telephones, and that those conversations were being recorded and filed for future use. So to me, the question is, it's not really when did the surveillance of Donald Trump start, it's did it ever stop? And when the FBI director and the former NSA director, Admiral Rogers, went before the House Intelligence Committee, they both said there was no surveillance at Trump Tower. We now know that that's a perjurious lie. We know for a fact that my conversations with Donald Trump were being surveilled under according to the New York Times of January 20th, page 1, headline, wiretap data utilized in probe of Trump aides. So which is it? I mean, this is deeply disturbing. And then in the wake of it, Tyler, the announcement that the Justice Department is going to indict Julian Assange. Julian Assange is a journalist. He has no more obligation to reveal who his sources are than the New York Times or the Washington Post. And if we begin indicting and jailing journalists, well, then every newspaper publisher, every reporter, every newspaper editor in the country needs to stop and think, because they could very well be next. This is a slippery slope. Now, I blame CIA Director Mike Pompeo, who said a week ago that Julian Assange is a Russian asset. No, Mr. Director, no, he is not, and you have no proof of that. Produce it or resign. Produce it or resign. This guy is a disgrace. Why Donald Trump ever appointed him, other than that he's a golfing buddy of Mike Pence, I have no idea. But it will be my goal for the next 3 years to drive the CIA director from public office. He has soiled his office, and he has disgraced himself with a lie, a blatant, flaming lie.
Now, I agree. I think to what extent, you wonder, the vetting that goes on for appointments to these positions, sort of like you have to have the right clearances and so forth. And I don't think Trump was directly.
Pompeo's a Harvard graduate. That alone should disallow the chances that he be CIA director. I close my case.
Well, in any event, it seems like on the intelligence side of things, we never get anybody who's truly a civil libertarian, or really, in my view, agrees with the rule of law and the civilian oversight of these agencies. Civilian meaning, I consider the NSA and these agencies to be quasi-military practically because of the way they're so invasive in their operations, and what they do is effectively, supposed to be for defense, security agency. It's right in the name. But it's really a disgrace that the fact that Assange has never been wrong. He's never released anything that was bum data. He's informed people of a lot of things that have gone on that frankly reflect not poorly on the American people or not poorly on necessarily our system of government as we believe it to be or should be, but reflects poorly on the law breaking or reflects on the law breaking that goes on within these agencies and the abuses of power. And the fact that is, as I've said many times in the past, Roger, if you don't want to see power abused, never confer it in the first place, because that's the only way you will not see it abused. When they have behind closed doors these massive powers to spy on people, they're going to be abused. Period.
Assange is not the criminals. It is those he's exposed that are the criminals. As you point out, the whole reason that the criminal John Podesta has raised the question of where the WikiLeaks information comes from is to distract from the content of the disclosures. He and his brother and the Clintons were in bed with Vladimir Putin. They made millions. The uranium deal, the gas deal, the banking deal. Why aren't these people in jail? But instead, we distract our attention from the contents. You pointed it out. Not anything that Assange has made public has been proven to be false or bogus. He has the eminent role, the important role of the whistleblower. Without a whistleblower, we would not know of corruption in our own government. So, the egregious acts of those who have been corrupt in American government and making that information public to the American people outranks any charge against Julian Assange, who in my view is still a hero.
And you see why this all started, well, very much of it started under George W. Bush with Admiral Poindexter and the sort of spooky people that the Bushes surround themselves with the total information awareness program that they put in place. And it's a bipartisan, well, not bipartisan, I mean, it's the sort of the ruling elite party. It's their program. It's what they want. And I think that's why you have there would have been major issues, I think, if Donald Trump tried to appoint somebody outside of that, as I mentioned, sort of this inner elite of people who have been vetted and said, well, we can live with this guy. I don't know what was said to Trump, why he would make it. I think it does, as you mentioned, come down to Mike Pence. That's really what it's about. And Pence, in this sense, it doesn't sit well with me, his being chosen. Ultimately, I think he brings a certain stability to the ticket, so to speak, as it was, as a campaign item. But as far as being vice president, it's very Cheney-esque of him to be in the background pushing all these establishment types, and particularly Pompeo, who will do nothing to reform what is a rogue agency, has never accounted for its crimes in the past, including its involvement in the assassination of the 35th president.
Well, we are going to be putting together a petition in which I seek 1 million signatures to the president demanding the firing of Mike Pompeo. Look for that at Infowars.com next week. You're here with us on the Stone Cold Truth. Roger Stone, Tyler Nixon, and we will be back with more of that exact Stone Cold Truth. Stand by.
This is the Reverend Jesse Jackson, and you are tuned in Roger Stone on the Stone Cold Truth.
Welcome back to the Stone Cold Truth here on the Genesis Communications Network. I'm with my co-host, Tyler Nixon, and joining us now, one of my favorite people, someone who has graciously had me a guest on his podcast many times, Stefan Molyneux, a major voice for those who revere freedom and liberty, joining us now. Stefan, welcome to the Stone Cold Truth.
Thanks, Roger. It's a great pleasure to be here.
So we've talked a little bit about President Trump's first 100 days. We've heard the mainstream media assessment. I'd like to hear your assessment. How do you think the president's doing?
I think he's doing relatively well. We knew, of course, when he was going in that he was going to face Republican resistance, that he was going to face deep state resistance, that, of course, the academics were going to go mental, that the mainstream media was going to go mental. And I wasn't exactly sure how the Jared and Ivanka show was going to play out. That's a little bit of a surprise for me. But I think he's doing relatively well. He got Gorsuch on the Supreme Court. There has been, this 2-for-1 regulation repeal deal, a bunch of other stuff. He's not able, of course, to get what he needs to get done in immigration and other places because the Ninth Circuit is so relentlessly lefty and a sort of hangover from the Obama days. So I think he's powering forward. I think he's making some necessary compromises. I mean, you have to zigzag a little bit. If you've ever sailed and you've got to sail against the wind, you've got to zigzag quite a bit. You got to tack and so on. So I think he's doing relatively well. I think that we still need to keep on him to keep him on the straight and narrow because a lot of people that got their hooks in him are trying to pull him in their particular direction. I think especially the intelligence community, which we can talk about with Assange. But I'm still pleased that I thought he was the right man for the job, and I think with the right amount of feedback, he can continue to do great things.
I think that's a very shrewd assessment. One of the places where I think there is a lack of understanding, his appointees at EPA, at the FCC, and at the FTC are literally taking an axe to overregulation. Putting the right people in those slots is going to prove to be extraordinarily important. But what you say is also true. The political establishment pressure on him to be quote-unquote respectable, quote-unquote mainstream, conventional. Sadly, I think this would please his son-in-law and his daughter, who do move in rarefied circles in New York and Los Angeles, and who would like the president to be more like Barack Obama. You see, in the wake of the Syrian surgical strike, we saw a situation in which Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, John McCain all praised the president. Now, in my view, when those people praise you, it means you've done something wrong. And, of course, in the view of Jared Kushner, when those people praise you, well, they think it means you've done something right.
Oh, there's a show that from many years ago called WKRP in Cincinnati, and there was a guy in it named Herb Tarlick. And if he was a salesman who had, do you remember he had his suits that looked like they'd been slashed off a Volkswagen seat cover? And if that guy comes up to you and says, nice threads, you know you have to go home and change. So you do have to be careful about who praises you, but it's also instructive to see who's opposing him. I think he's getting a lot of opposition, of course. I mean, just look at the State Department. He's cutting things in the State Department. I actually would have preferred if he'd cut things in the State Department by arresting people for the war crimes of overturning foreign governments, but that might be my particular out-of-country preference. But he's got to delegate. He's just the quarterback. He's not the whole team, and you can't just focus on him and him alone. He's got to find right people. He's going to have to make compromises. You never get to just hire your photocopies. You're going to have to find people who are going to disagree with you, and they're going to disagree with you on things that you're right on and things that you're wrong on. So it's a deal. He talks about the long term, and I think that's what he's playing for.
One of the things that's concerned me, though, is that many good, solid, experienced Trump supporters, people who have been through the campaign wars, people who have experience in government, have been able to find no place in this administration, and that establishment Republicans and establishment figures like, Dina Habib Powell is in the White House, Gary Cohen, former chairman of Goldman Sachs, liberal Democrat, hater of tax reduction. He's the president's chief economic advisor. These appointments make no sense to me. Meanwhile, people like Ed Martin, former chief of staff to the governor of Missouri, former chief counsel to Pope John Paul, former head of the St. Louis Elections Board, a man who speaks 4 languages, eminently capable, the man who put together Missouri for Donald Trump, he hears nothing from the White House Personnel Office. I find this deeply, deeply disturbing.
Well, Roger, if I might jump in here, as Stefan had said, the long, slow walk to freedom. I think he's looking at 8 years. I think they're planning an 8-year timeline for everything. He's going to face re-election, and nobody lasts the whole duration in a presidency. So I'd rather see him get these people in, and if he's going to have them in the administration, get him in there up front. Let him burn out, let him whatever. But I mean, we do have the the House Freedom Caucus. I think he's going to be looking at re-election. He's going to want to keep his coalition together, and let's hope that as the re-election year approaches, that we'll see some better appointments, and we'll also see progress on any number of these issues in the bigger picture. But I think you got to give the man a chance. I heard the other day someone said, "Oh, if he doesn't get tax reform done now, it's over." Like that's the whole thing. It's barely been 3 months in, for God's sake. I mean, Barack Obama.
But the back, even the backstory there is amazing. I can tell you firsthand that virtually everyone on the White House staff and among the president's advisors opposed his moving to tax reform now. Sean Hannity's been harping again and again, Obamacare and its repeal is the only important issue. Sean, wrong. If we need a house painter from Long Island, we'll send for you. Wrong. Just completely wrong.
Yeah, what I would say is that it's really, really important for people out there who want freedom to understand that we are trying to unravel a giant knot in the West as a whole. The Federal Reserve came in over 100 years ago. It gave the government enormous amounts of magic money in order to grow itself. And the growth of the government has been intense. It's been complex. And they've set up their tripwires to shrinkage. Right, in the same way they've set up their tripwires to being able to control immigration, right, by saying, well, you can't discriminate on the basis of religion or other factors. So they have set up a lot of legal defenses. It's like disarming a very complicated bomb to try and reduce the size and power of the American government. It is a long, delicate, difficult operation. There's no big elbow room. If the president could just simply dismantle the government, it almost wouldn't be a system worth defending because it would be a totalitarian kind of system. He's got to work with people. As far as the advisors go, maybe, on a limb, you could say it's a case of keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. If he alienates everyone who opposes him, all he's going to do is set up yet another camp of people to snipe and undermine at him, and that may be just one camp too many.
No, I think you make a good point. I guess what I was saying is that I know firsthand that the overwhelming advice to the president was to delay tax reform until next year, but that a small group of activists, pro-growth activists, were involved in a call with the president, and they overnight reinforced his instinct, which was to move tax reform now. Economic growth is the key to the success of the Trump administration. We'll be right back with Stefan Molyneux, Tyler Nixon, right here on the Stone Cold Truth.
This is Richard Milhouse Nixon, and the Cold War may be over, but the stone cold truth is still around. And I give you my buddy, Roger Stone.
Welcome back. We're here at the Stone Cold Truth with Stefan Molyneux, my co-host Tyler Nixon. We've had a lot of incoming mail today of folks who want to ask Stefan some questions. So Tyler, why don't you give us the phone number, the call-in phone number?
Sure. If you'd like to reach the show, the number is 877-300-7645. Again, that's 877-300-7645 to call the Stone Cold Truth to speak to Roger Stone and our guest, Stefan Molyneux.
Some very encouraging news today. The governor of Nevada, Brian Sandoval, says that he met with the Attorney General of the United States, Jeff Sessions, and he told Attorney General Sessions that he and the state of Nevada plan to move ahead to implement the regulation of recreational marijuana in the Silver State, that the acceptance of recreational marijuana has been overwhelmingly approved by Nevada voters. And to his surprise, he doesn't seem to have gotten any pushback from the Attorney General, who appears to be reassessing his earlier pronouncement that while the Justice Department would not mess with states that had legalize medicinal marijuana, they intended to enforce the law in the 8, soon-to-be 9 states that have approved recreational marijuana through the exact same state process of legalization. This never made any sense to me. Perhaps the Attorney General's coming to his senses. Gentlemen, what do you think?
Well, I would say that the last time that drugs were legal, hard drugs were legal, there was no particular welfare state. I think this combination of easy access to drugs, plus a really bad economy, plus a welfare state, might be somewhat challenging for the motivation of millions of Americans. If the tax cuts work, or if other things that Trump can do can help to build up the economy, can help to grow the economy, I have no moral or philosophical objections to the legalization of drugs. The use of mind-altering substances other than CNN is an entirely voluntary and moral thing to do. It's fine, nobody's initiating the use of force when they go out and buy medicinal plants that can alter, have medicinal purposes, and of course can be psychoactive as well. So from a moral standpoint, it's perfectly fine, but in combination with the welfare state and bad job growth, I think there could be a real drag on the economy.
Well, Stefan, I have to disagree with the premise of your argument, which is that the prohibition works and that there would be more drug users, or people would tend to use more drugs if it were legal. People have access to these drugs now. The question is, what are the consequences of it? And in addition to, obviously we have addiction rates and so forth. But, if you read Jacob Sullivan's excellent book, Saying Yes in Defense of Drug Usage, we criminalize the 95% or more of drug users who do so responsibly, as, millions of marijuana users and, frankly, millions of cocaine users and all the other drugs. The only one really is opioids, I think, is the worst. But people use these drugs. They do it often, responsibly within their lives, just as people do with alcohol. And we have turned the entire society upside down to accommodate that small percentage of people who have serious addiction or health problems with it. If we were to take the amount of money that we put into the violent, racist drug war that has gutted the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendments and turned our society inside out, caused disrespect for the rule of law, caused people to hate police, and we put that money towards, programs, not having to spend a dime more, towards rehabilitating and helping people who need help with substance abuse or substance dependency issues, I think we'd see a net neutral. But obviously the more soft result would be no more of this, like they can just spy on you as if you're a foreign enemy because you're smoking a joint in your living room or something like that, or even just involved in the trade.
Course, as you probably know, I mean, the mafia first came to America during the alcohol prohibition.
That's right.
That occurred in the past. And so massive undercutting of the profits for organized crime. And of course, when drugs become legal, they become much cheaper. So if you are a drug addict, you don't also have to become a thief or some other kind of, you don't have to sell yourself into prostitution just to maintain your drug habit. And of course, marijuana completely, I would argue, I enjoy Sgt. Pepper's as well. It's completely benevolent relative to some of the other drugs, these hard opioids that are out there that are really causing havoc in American society. Not to mention, these drugs, these sort of supposed drugs for antidepressants and stuff like that, which have some significant health consequences, can turn people psychotic, have questionable benefits in mental health treatments and so on. So I agree with you completely. I think that when drugs become legal as a whole, you're going to see a much better improvement in society, cheaper policing, cheaper incarceration, less profits for organized crime, and more incentive for people to actually go out and get jobs rather than deal soft drugs.
Sure. Incredibly though, last week, Secretary Kelly, the Homeland Security Secretary, actually was quoted as saying, "We know that marijuana is a gateway drug." What planet does this man live on?
Yeah,
this is not 19. I mean, this is, if that were true, since we know that we have millions of marijuana users in the United States, why do we not have an army, a mass numbers of heroin addict zombies? No, Mr. Secretary, since you probably never had a joint in your hand in your life, marijuana is not a gateway drug, and this is a throwback to the days of reefer madness. How can anybody be that out of touch?
Yeah, well, because it's exactly right. That's the type of people you get in these positions. But it's a gateway, Roger, in a sense. It's a gateway to the black market. It's a gateway to where you can access people who will sell drugs to children. Why? Because it's unregulated. It's as though we're going to regulate it to the extreme where it's completely unregulated. I mean, that's the fallacy of prohibition in and of itself. It really does not work. The drug war is worse than the drugs themselves. And Stefan's points, your points were absolutely excellent and spot on. You're totally correct. You know, it's just in all that aside, let's say the economics aside, you look at who is against, ending prohibition, and I think that says it all right there. Pharmaceutical companies, beer and liquor manufacturers, prison guards, and cops. I mean, you want to talk about an assemblage of people of suspect political motivations. There it is.
Well, you always hear about this gateway drug stuff as if Reefer Madness is some kind of documentary. I would say a much more important conversation is that fiat currency is a gateway drug to totalitarianism, but you won't hear about that too much. And you do, of course, there are huge vested interests in society that want to keep this stuff illegal because they want to sell you bad medicine for challenging problems you might have with regards to happiness, and they don't want people having alternative therapies. They don't want people having control over what they put in their own bodies. And the government, of course, loves it when they can be proactive, like the police force. Nobody's complaining. If you go out and you buy marijuana from someone and you get what you want and that person gets your money, no one's complaining. No one's running to the government and saying, I was robbed. So the government has to follow you around and be proactive rather than wait for the phone call that something bad has happened to you. And when the government gets to be proactive, our freedoms get shredded.
Yeah, preemptive is probably more the word. It's like this presumption that guts due process, substantive due process, as a thing within our justice system, where the laws, you don't have to prove intent to do anything bad. You just don't have to prove intent at all. Mere possession alone it's like a strict liability crime. I mean, it's really if you were to look at it from a legal perspective in terms of like what are the foundation of our rights, the ideas of natural rights, as well as just basic justice, it's an abomination. It's absolutely an abomination. You don't have to have a criminal mind, malintent, what they call, malum per se, which means, like there are things, there are acts that are bad in and of themselves. Murdering somebody is a bad act, not killing somebody if it's in self-defense and so forth. But, these crimes, you don't have to have any sort of mens rea criminal mind just to merely face decades in prison. It's crazy.
Let's move on now to another abomination, because I'm curious, Stefan, to see how this is affecting you. I am seeing the slow motion strangulation of Stone Cold Truth by Google, by Facebook, by Amazon. And I notice that the censors and the fake news blockers are really putting the wood to comment across the board. I want to talk about this when we come back, because I think this assault on a free press, this assault on the First Amendment, could be the greatest single challenge that we face. We'll be back at the Stone Cold Truth with Stefan Molyneux, Tyler Nixon, and your host, Roger Stone. Stand by.
This is Bernie Sanders, and you're listening to The Stone Cold Truth with Roger Stone.
Welcome back. We're here still at the Stone Cold Truth with our special guest, Stefan Molyneux, my co-host, Tyler Nixon. And at the end of the last segment, we began a discussion of what's going on the internet, where Google, Facebook, Amazon, and others that we now call the tech left are beginning a systematic program of censorship to try to kill a vibrant, robust alternative media, which I believe is responsible largely for the election of President Donald Trump. Now, most Americans know that while they were celebrating Christmas in 2017, Barack Obama quietly signed and authorized a military spending budget that included something called the Counter-Disinformation and Anti-Propaganda Act, which actually criminalized quote-unquote fake news on the internet. He signed this on December 23rd. And this sets up essentially a ministry of truth. a national censorship board, and it provides funding and allows the government to work with internet providers to decide who is fake news and who is not. $160 million over 2 years was authorized to support local independent media to help them refute disinformation and manipulation within their community. This is now being used by MoveOn.org and Media Matters and others as a justification and the financing for wholesale censorship. I don't know what's happening to you, Stefan, but at StoneColdTruth.com and StoneZone.com, we are seeing the precipitous fall of our retweets, of our reposts, of our reach. This is nothing worse than Stalinistic censorship. And I'm hopeful that the Trump Justice Department will wake up to the fact that this is antitrust, that this violates the antitrust laws, and that there is need for the government to step up to guarantee a free and open, truly neutral internet. What's the experience of your broadcasts?
Well, many years ago when I first started this, I decided not to take ads, but to rely on donations. And people can, if they like what I do, can go to freedomainradio.com/donate to help out. So as far as ad suppression goes, doesn't really affect me that much. We're not generally featured, and, maybe there's some algorithms pushing us down. It's kind of hard for us to measure that at Free Domain Radio. But I'm thrilled. I hate to put it this way, but it's pretty blunt. You have two choices in life when you want to get things done. You can either be ineffective or you can be opposed. Now, the fact that we're being opposed means because we're being effective. And I also love how it's a complete confession of impotence and incompetence on the part of the government with regards to public schools. Because why on earth would the government need to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to suppress fake news when they already have children for 12 years straight to teach them how to think critically, to teach them how to sort out reason and evidence, to teach them how to go to sources, to teach them how to be skeptical. But because the government doesn't teach people how to be skeptical, then they've got to try and backfill it with this made-up fake news stuff. The government should be teaching children from the beginning how to spot fake news, how to spot fake information. But of course, I think that would harm the government a lot more than people on the internet.
Well, I believe in letting the people decide. In other words, they can read Infowars.com, they can read CNN, and it won't take them long to figure out who's fake news and who isn't. I do identify with the comment you just made. If you see the trailer for the upcoming Netflix documentary, Get Me Roger Stone, I'm quoted as saying, "I revel in your hatred, because if I was not effective, you would not hate me." And I think it does speak to the effectiveness of the alternative media, and that we've had an impact. But make no mistake about it, the tech left is seeking to put the toothpaste back into the tube. They would like to go back to the days when ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and the swiftly moving Fox had an absolute monopoly on the dissemination of political information. And if things weren't reported there, they simply didn't happen. I know that Alex Jones and InfoWars are under particularly attack. We have both been dumped by AdRoll, a company that told us they would no longer work with us because they've decided that everything we say is fake. I've decided that they're fake. Stay tuned on that. But I think that this is the greatest First Amendment issue that we face. I'm glad to hear, Stefan, that your model allows you to have some immunity to it, because I think what you do is very important, and I'm, as you know, a fan. But I really fear for the Republic if they are allowed to engage in this kind of broad-based censorship.
I would say, though, that the First Amendment wasn't really available to most people back when there was such a stranglehold on the media by the large media companies. Really, the problem is that people are actually having a great capacity to exercise freedom of speech now using the internet than has ever existed before. I've likened it many years ago to the first invention of the printing press, right? And so now that people have the capacity to communicate to the world using a cell phone, using a little webcam, anything that they want, now the actual First Amendment is able to be exercised by everyone. Free speech is now able to be exercised by everyone. You didn't need to suppress it as much before because people didn't have as much capacity to communicate. Now they do. We're seeing the limits that formerly were softly imposed by corporate monopolies. Now they're having to be imposed by law because people finally have the same kind of free speech that the media has already had, and that is pretty unacceptable to a lot of people.
Well, absolutely.
Go ahead,
I was
Tyler.
just going to quickly say that, there's people who believe that the First Amendment, in terms of the, quote, freedom of the press, only applies to actual professional reporters, that it doesn't apply to the dissemination of any information, regardless. I mean, it could be fake as you want. As far as I'm concerned, if you're not lying in a, judicial proceeding, say what you will and let people evaluate the information on its face.
Well, I often talk about this in the context of the Kennedy assassination in 1963, on which, as you both know, I've written a book. The idea that then we had one filmed record taken by this fella Zapruder, whose film was still doctored by the government anyway. Compare that to what would have happened today if there was an assassination of a public official. You would have hundreds of video camera recordings of it. A cover-up would be completely impossible because of our immediate access to the internet and our ability to have the technology to record relatively effortlessly. To me, this is a very positive development. Look, we know the FBI showed up at the Dallas Morning News, rewrote their page one story on the Kennedy assassination, actually dictated it, locked reporters in a room and wouldn't let them leave. So it has made censorship, real censorship, in a sense, impossible, and therefore they're going to try to do it technologically by limiting your reach, limiting your following. I know that it has had a really deleterious effect on Infowars.com. We've seen it at Stone Cold Truth, where our retweets, our follows, our reposts were running in the hundreds of thousands in October, in some cases down to the dozens, not in January, but beginning in February and March. I'm going to be boring in on this issue and working with a coalition of others. The answer lies either in antitrust actions by the Trump Justice Department or perhaps a class action suit. But it's a fight that must be fought, and I think soon.
Well, I also think that shareholders will get upset if, as seems to be happening with Twitter and other companies, if the management is knowingly harming the value of the company's shares by going against its general terms of service and putting in very subjective and very politically motivated restrictions on what people can talk about on their platform, then people are going to start drifting to other platforms. And, of course, if advertisers get targeted, then there's going to be a reduction in the value of what's going on. And there will be counter, right? So a lot of the Wall Street Journal went after PewDiePie and then, threatened $750 million worth of advertising that YouTube was starting to rely on. But there'll be counter stuff where all of the people who are doing this and all the companies that are doing this kind of stuff, they will have their sort of counter-conservative kind of right-wing boycotts and so on. So the companies that are playing favorites in social media are going to be, I think, in the long run, harming the value of their stock. And if they're doing that, and that can be proven, there could be potential for, fiduciary problems that has, a lack of fiduciary responsibility in the maintenance of stock price. Maybe shareholders could have some sort of option or some sort of remedy that way. But I would defer that to Tyler, who actually knows a lot more about these things, I'm sure, than I do.
It's a very good point. I would say one of the things that's disappointed me is the administration's seeming lack of understanding or even cognizance of what's going on here. I told the president about a week ago that if he looks carefully, he will see that the negative comments regarding his tweets are being pushed to the top, and the positive comments are either being pushed to the bottom or being deleted entirely.
Yep.
That is where we're headed. Anyway, a terrific show here on the Stone Cold Truth. Thanks to our special guest, Stefan Molyneux,
Roger
Tyler
Stone.
Nixon.